When you think of IndyCar tracks, what comes to mind? Most obvious, almost anyone will tell you, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the league's flagship track and home of its flagship event, the Indianapolis 500. But what about other tracks? Some other notable ones that come to mind include road courses like Mid-Ohio and Laguna Seca, street circuits like Long Beach and Toronto, or other oval circuits such as Nashville and Milwaukee, which both return to the calendar in 2024. What about former tracks? There's plenty to name. Tracks such as Surfers Paradise, Auto Club Speedway, and Texas Motor Speedway are those that probably come to mind. In this video, we will be highlighting a former venue on the IndyCar calendar that returned briefly during the CART IRL split years. This is a review of the Indy Racing League at Dover Motor Speedway. As alluded to in the intro, the Dover Motor Speedway was a track that had been on the IndyCar calendar at one point before its return with the IRL in 1998. In 1969, the IndyCar Series, at this point under USAC sanction, ran the Delaware 200 at the then newly opened venue. The race itself was won by Art Pollard, his second and final career win in the series after having won the Rex Mays Classic in Milwaukee earlier in the year. His win notably was the only win for a Chrysler-powered IndyCar as the team used Plymouth engines for this race. Pollard's team, owned by Andy Granatelli, switched between Plymouth and Offenhauser engines throughout the '69 season. Pollard's win, though, was unfortunately overshadowed by the fact that this race was a disaster for the IndyCars. Only 10 cars finished, with 2 of them, Pollard and Gordon Johncock, finishing on the lead lap. The remaining cars either crashed out, or in the case of drivers Al Laquasto and Ludwig Heimrath, black flagged and disqualified after 55 and 73 laps respectively. Additionally, among those that missed the field was Lloyd Ruby, who had crashed out during qualifying. Because the crash happened on the upper banking of the track, fire and rescue teams had trouble getting up the banking to put out the fire. As a result, Ruby unfortunately suffered second-degree burns and would be out of IndyCar until that November's Bobby Ball 150 from Phoenix. 1 year later, the race was set to return for a 250-mile event on July 19. The event, however, ended up being canceled. The main reason can be attributed to a repave that happened prior to the 1970 auto racing season at the track to help bring about better IndyCar racing. The track was repaved in turns 1 and 3 after drivers complained about the racing surface in the 1969 event. However, the surface following the repave hadn't hardened enough to allow for the lighter open-wheel cars to race, according to then IndyCar driver Mike Mosley, who tested the new surface. Instead, the race would be canceled, and the 10-year contract USAC IndyCar had with Dover would be dissolved. The race date's replacement would be USAC Stock Car Series, which would now see its race date moved up from the original August 9 date and shortened to 200 miles compared to the 300 miles they ran a season ago. The race would be won by A.J. Foyt, who also won the previous year's race. The rest of the top 5 were made up of previous or future champions of USAC Stock Car Series, the most notable being Butch Hartman, who would go on to win the series championship 5 times. Other notables taking part in the event included winning short track veteran Dick Trickle, who finished 14th, and 2-time USAC, IndyCar, and 3-time Indianapolis 500 winner Bobby Unser, who finished 19th. Throughout the remainder of the 70s, 80s, and the majority of the 90s, Dover Motor Speedway would predominantly see stock car racing only. The one exception was when the Great American Truck Racing Series had a brief outing in the early 80s when they raced big rigs around the circuit. On September 30, 1997, it was announced that Indianapolis-style open-wheel cars would return to the circuit. IRL founder Tony George, in conjunction with then Series Executive Director Leo Mell, and then Dover President and CEO Dennis McGlynn, said that the race would be held on July 19, 1998, and would have a prize purse in excess of $1 million. Mell added that with the Dover event, the IRL would be hoping to build a new fan base in that geographic area of the East Coast. Championship Drivers Association board member and fellow IRL competitor Scott Goodyear praised the track from a safety perspective upon his initial visit. His only criticisms, though, were ensuring the track's inside guardrails would be replaced with concrete and that the pit entries would be repaved to better suit the Indy cars. Most obvious about the IRL's visit to Dover would be that this would be the first time open-wheel cars have tackled the track as a concrete surface. Besides that, this would be the first time in league history that a high-banked 1-mile oval would be on the calendar, as Dover's turns are banked at 24 degrees. It is worth mentioning that the IRL in these days had already visited 24-degree bank tracks in the case of the 1.5-mile tracks at Charlotte, Texas, and we're going to race at another 24-degree bank track at Atlanta in 1998. The first scheduled on-track days at Dover would be part of an IRL Open test on June 15 and 16. 10 drivers would be scheduled to take part. Those drivers that were scheduled to participate included Tony Stewart, Robbie Buell, Arie Luyendyk, Scott Goodyear, Buzz Calkins, Sam Schmidt, Stan Waddles, John Paul Jr., Marco Greco, and Jeff Ward. On the first day of testing, Luyendyk would set the quickest speed of 180.524 miles per hour and a lap time of 19.942 seconds. Only a fraction off in second was Tony Stewart at 180.379 miles per hour, 19.958 seconds. The speed Luyendyk set was nearly 25 miles per hour faster than the track record set by Rusty Wallace in the Cup Series at 155.898 miles per hour from that season's spring race. On the second day, though, Stewart would be fastest at 183.299 miles per hour. IRL Director of Racing Operations Brian Barnhart said that teams and officials were very happy with the info they gathered. He also added that tire suppliers Firestone and Goodyear were pleasantly surprised at how well their tires were wearing on the concrete track. As race day began to draw near, storylines would begin to emerge, some of which began as recently as the last race in New Hampshire. One of those storylines involved naming the driver for the Conseco AJ Foyt Racing entry. Normal driver Billy Boat, who had won earlier in the season at Texas, would be out for a few races after getting collected in this spin by J.J. Yaley and then being hit by Donnie Beechler. Boat would suffer a broken left leg and a fractured pelvis. He would miss the next 2 races, returning for the event at Pikes Peak where he would finish the season. Boat's replacement for those next 2 races would be Greg Ray. In his last race out, he would finish second at Texas to race winner Boat in a late race duel. Speaking of second-place finishers, Scott Goodyear had recorded his third career IRL second-place finish at the last race at New Hampshire. A 2-time winner of the Michigan 500 in kart, Goodyear's last 2 second-place finishes came in the previous season's Indianapolis 500 and the Las Vegas season finale. Goodyear's chances of winning at New Hampshire were dashed after having lost 5th gear before the halfway point and then 6th gear before the end of the race. Going into Dover, Goodyear would be 5th in the point standings. In June, he had been second quick on day 2 of testing at the Monster Mile at a speed of 182.149 miles per hour. And while it was known that then incoming quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens Jim Harbaugh was a co-owner for Goodyear's team Panther Racing, one other Raven would be working with a different driver, given that physical demand would be putting stress on the drivers due to the G-forces brought on by the 24-degree banking for 248 laps. Driver fitness became of utmost importance. The Raven in question would be former strength and conditioning coach Jerry Simmons. For the upcoming Dover race, Simmons would be training with driver Davey Hamilton. The partnership came to be due in part to Simmons' relationship with Rick Gallis, who was a general manager at the Nine House Motorsports team that Hamilton was driving for at the time. Training with Raven players, Hamilton would spend 3 days in Baltimore being evaluated on his strength, cardiovascular fitness, training regimen, and eating habits. Hamilton learned quite a bit while down there, given thanks to his crew with regards to being in perfect physical condition, he said in an interview with the Auto Channel. Speaking of physical condition, Jim Guthrie would be well enough to make his return to the IRL by driving for Price Cobb's Cobb Racing in this event. Guthrie started the season by driving for ISM Racing for the first 3 races. At Indianapolis, though, he'd be caught up in this vicious accident as he attempted to evade Sam Schmidt on lap 49. For the next 6 weeks, Guthrie would be out with a broken right elbow and left leg, cracked ribs, and a cut on his right leg. Prior to returning at Dover, Guthrie would participate at the IRL Open Test from Atlanta. From there, Guthrie had initially considered making his IRL return at New Hampshire. However, both he and Cobb decided to wait until this event in order to avoid pushing his recovery too much. From the storylines, we would now move on to race weekend. On the pole position would be Tony Stewart at a speed of 185.204 miles per hour, which would officially beat Rusty Wallace's 155.898 from the past May in the Cup Series and Stewart's own 183.299 from the second day of IRL testing at the venue. Alongside him would be Davey Hamilton, his first front row start of the season. The remainder of the grid would look like this. One driver, Buzz Calkins, would withdraw. Given the lackluster season he'd been having, combined with blowing an engine prior to qualifying, Calkins decided to skip the event and return for the next event at Charlotte. The other, Eliseo Salazar, would be involved in this practice accident in which he suffered from a broken pelvis and a broken leg. He wouldn't return until next season. With that, the green flag would drop and the race would be underway. It wouldn't take long, though, for problems to begin developing, albeit a mechanical one. John Paul Jr. would pull into the pits on lap 6 and would retire with engine failure. Right at the start, Scott Harrington would pull into the pits on lap 1 and retire with handling troubles. And speaking of early troubles, CBS pit reporter Ralph Shaheen had this to say prior to the race's first caution.
Mike, the bumps on this racetrack as they cross over the sections of concrete are so bad for the drivers that their eyes are just vibrating furiously to the point that most of the drivers cannot see their gauges.
Hard in the wall, Ralph, and that is the 35. It is Jeff Ward. Spinning is Jack Miller. Spinning is Scott Goodyear. Miller plows into the back of Ward, but Jeff Ward hit the wall in turn 4 a ton. The right side, wheels and suspension have been stripped from the car. Ward, of all the drivers here, perhaps in the best of physical condition, and he is going to climb out under his own power.
Yeah, it looks like Jack Miller is moving around in there too, and there's Goodyear, so it looks like all the drivers are okay.
In the first caution, we would see Dr. Jack Miller and Jeff Ward retire. Scott Goodyear, who was caught up in the crash, would continue after replacing his car's front nose, though would fall several laps down, repairing suspension problems. One lap after the restart, on lap 37, we would see Scott Sharp drop below the apron, nearly losing control of his car while attempting to pass on Tony Stewart. Next caution would be on lap 43 when Mark Dismore would retire with a blown engine. On lap 77, Sam Schmidt would run out of fuel trying to stretch his window. As he approached the pits, the caution would be displayed several laps later. The race would resume and would not be long for the next caution to come out again, this one too involving Sam Schmidt. Coming out of turn 4, Schmidt got loose while attempting to correct his car and ran into the outside wall. With the right side of his car destroyed, Schmidt would be out, but would be okay. One lap later, after the next restart, Greg Ray and Eddie Cheever would make contact going into turn 2. Both drivers would retire from the race. Steve Knapp would be the next caution on lap 151 when the rear of his car broke going into turn 2. Under this caution period, Davey Hamilton would make a pit stop to address loss of power issues. Tony Stewart would pit following the restart with a mechanical issue. Dick Berggren explains what the culprit was.
This is a constant velocity joint. This is the drive shaft of the car that runs to the wheel and turns the wheel, and that bearing is what has failed on Tony Stewart's car. He has asked the mechanics to replace this entire system with a new one so that he can at least go fast enough to run around the bottom and pick up points, and that is a long way from having the potential to win this thing today, Mike.
He would fall several laps down, but would continue. Next caution on lap 184 would be for this accident involving Robbie Unser. Following the race, he'd be diagnosed with a broken left foot and would be out until race 8 at Pikes Peak. The last caution on lap 203 would be for Arie Luyendyk's spin going into turn 4. Noteworthy with his spin was the sudden termination of his car's engine. Listen.
This is down the back straightaway here. Entering turn 3. Oh you can hear. It sounded like the motor locked up or something and just stopped all of a sudden and jumped the back end sideways. So it almost sounded like the motor froze up right there. And when the back wheel stops spinning, the back catches the front.
With that would be the run to the finish, which would see Scott Sharp pick up his third career win, with a hard-charging Buddy Lazier come home second. In the aftermath, though, there was more controversy than praise about the race. Besides Robbie Unser's broken foot, some drivers dealt with pain too during the race event. Winner Sharp dealt with sore hands, while second-place Lazier dealt with aching teeth. Tony Stewart, who finished the race in 8th, pitted frequently throughout the race. Besides the aforementioned mechanical issue, he also would pit to fix his car's dash that had come loose throughout the event, brought on by the rough track surface. Despite all that, the race would again return to the calendar 1 year later. For the 1999 running, though, the race would be reduced from its 248-mile distance to just 200 miles, and would be now known as the MBNA Mid-Atlantic 200. Also different would be the network broadcasting the race.
This is the place where champions are crowned, where legends are made, and dreams come true. You're watching Fox Sports.
Prior to the current 2025 TV deal, the Fox network would broadcast this race tape delayed, and would be the first ever motorsports event to air on the network. The first live race, though, would be almost 2 years later on February 11, when the network would carry the NASCAR Cup Series Budweiser Shootout as part of Daytona Speedweek's 2001. The free-to-air network's first live IndyCar race, though, would be a year later in 2002, when they would cover that season's Toyota Grand Prix of Long Beach for the Kart FedEx Championship Series. Most notable is that the race itself would be the scene of Michael Andretti's final career IndyCar win as a driver. For the 1999 Dover race, Fox's deal to cover this event was part of a deal for the 1999 season that saw it, Fox Sports Net, and Speedvision replace CBS and TNN for coverage of the IRL, which included returning partner ABC. Fox up to this point had only carried motorsports coverage on Fox Sports Net, which included Formula One, NASCAR qualifying, and Speedvision programming. Speedvision would join the Fox family of networks in 1998 when then Fox owners News Corp purchased a 20% stake in the channel. While the 1999 edition of this race didn't have as many notable pre-race storylines as the previous year's edition, there was still some notable headlines to go around. 3 drivers who didn't run in the 1998 race would take part in the 1999 running. Buzz Calkins, Billy Boat, and Eliseo Salazar would be the drivers, with Calkins qualifying 12th, Boat 16th, and Salazar 21st. Mark Dismore would secure the pole at a speed of 182.639 miles per hour. Also, 2 drivers would have the chance to become the IRL's winningest driver at the time. The then reigning Indianapolis 500 champion Kenny Brack and Scott Sharp. Both drivers would be tied with retired IndyCar driver Arie Luyendyk for most IRL wins at 4, and would again have another chance to become the first to reach 5 IRL wins. With those storylines out of the way, the green flag would fall and the race would be underway. The first caution would fall on lap 36 when leader Scott Sharp spun going into turn 4. The cause was due to a tire that began to rapidly shred without warning. During pit stops under this yellow, Jeff Ward would nearly spin as he attempted to enter his box, as Sam Schmidt made contact while attempting to leave his box. Both would continue. The second caution would occur on lap 57 when Eddie Cheever was sent into the outside retaining wall. Unable to pass on the outside, Cheever had let off the throttle while moving low, which allowed John Hollinsworth to unintentionally make contact with him, which resulted in the accident taking place. Several laps later, when they went back racing, we get this accident.
I'll be here in a second. Robbie drifted up. I had to back off, and I got hit from behind from Hollinsworth. It's unfortunate.
We've got trouble. We've got trouble. Big trouble out of turn number 2 and midway down the straightaway. Eliseo Salazar is involved,
And
as is John Hollinsworth. Tice Carlson also being called into play. You could see him in the left-hand side of your screen.
You see, Hollinsworth is moving around. That's definitely a good sign.
And how about Eliseo Salazar? A year ago, in practice before this race, he was also involved in a very serious crash. Hollandsworth showing his disappointment there with his fist. This, for Salazar, was supposed to be the final stage to his rehabilitation after having so many bones in his body broken in this crash a year ago. Comes back and now involved in an early incident with Hollandsworth.
The accident began on lap 70 when the rear wing on Eliseo Salazar's car broke, sending him into the outside retaining wall hard. John Hollandsworth would be collected in this accident as well. Less than 60 laps to go, and Robbie McGee would find himself crawling slow to pit road as he ran out of fuel while leading. Moments later, the caution would be displayed for the stalled car of Jimmy Kite. He'd retire with brake failure. The last caution would come out with 11 laps to go, and Mark Dismore would make contact with Stefan Gregoire. When the race resumed, there would only be 3 laps left. At race's end, it would be Greg Ray picking up his second career win. The rest of the top 5 would look like this, with Sam Schmidt coming home 5th despite gearbox issues late in the race. As far as the remainder of the running order, it would look like this, with Davey Hamilton being the first driver to retire due to engine issues. Before the race weekend was over, the ASA AC Delco Challenge Series would host their lone visit at the venue. Before it became known as 7-time, Jimmy Johnson would secure the pole position, his 4th and final career pole in the series. Of course, that highlight would be obscured by several lowlights throughout the event. Before the green flag, Johnson would visit pit road to get his steering box reset after he complained of crooked steering on the pace laps. Fortunately, he would resume his spot on the pole. Not so fortunate, though, would be his tire issues, which happened twice throughout the event, including this spin entering pit road, where he nearly hit Mike Garvey. The cause of the spin was more than likely attributed to driver Rick Beebe, who laid down oil on the track as a result of engine issues. He would retire, completing 81 laps, finishing 24th. Johnson, meanwhile, would finish 8th in the race as the first driver 1 lap or more down. Gary St. Amant would pick up his 4th career win in the event. With the conclusion of this event weekend would also come the end of IndyCar racing at Dover. When the 2000 season calendar was released, missing from the schedule would be Dover, Charlotte, and the second race date at Pikes Peak. Dover would be dropped citing financial concerns from lack of attendance, while Charlotte was understandably dropped following the abandoned Visionaire 500 from the venue in which 3 spectators were killed when debris from a crash entered the grandstands. Added to the calendar would be the then newly opened Kentucky Speedway, which hosted its first event on August 27. Additionally, the Cleveland Burke Lakefront Airport was expected to join the IRL calendar from CART. Had the race come to fruition, it would have seen its track layout change from this to something maybe like this. However, the deal fell through when the oval track reconfiguration would have required FAA approval, as well as the city of Cleveland deeming the track improvements excessive and not enhancing to the airport. Instead, a new multi-year deal would be signed with CART, which would see its return for its 2000 schedule. Notably, this first race under the new contract would see super sub Roberto Moreno pick up his first career IndyCar win. Speaking of drivers, Tony Stewart and Jimmy Johnson are just 2 notables mentioned to have competed at Dover in non-NASCAR sanctioned events. Though it was competing in the Cup Series, they found more success at the venue. For Stewart, he'd go on to sweep the Cup races at the venue for the 2000 season, becoming the first driver to do so since Jeff Gordon during the 1996 season. Stewart's last win at Dover came in the spring race of 2013. For Johnson, meanwhile, Dover was the site of his second career Cup Series victory after having won in Fontana earlier in the 2002 season. Like Stewart, he too would sweep the races at the venue in a single season. Unlike Stewart, though, he'd do it twice, also accomplishing this feat in the 2009 season. That season, notably, he'd become the first driver to win the Cup Championship 4 consecutive times, beating Cale Yarborough's streak of 3 consecutive championships. At present, Dover is the site of Jimmy Johnson's last Cup Series points victory as of the making of this video. To end this video on a relatable note to the topic discussed, The IRL would not return to the Mid-Atlantic region until 2001, when the series would return to stock car country by racing at Richmond. Then rival CART had already been established in the region by racing at the Nazareth Speedway in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. 18 years later, in 2019, also in Pennsylvania, would be the last time the IndyCars raced in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. When the series visited Pocono Raceway, it would also serve as the last time the series would visit an oval greater than 2 miles outside Indianapolis. The race itself would be won by Will Power, with the winningest active IndyCar driver Scott Dixon finishing second. Of course, now in 2026, we will be returning to the Mid-Atlantic region with a race in Washington, D.C. It will be the first street race of a traditional nature in the D.C. area since 2002, when both the Trans Am Series and American Le Mans Series raced around RFK Memorial Stadium. Global Rallycross also held an event around RFK in 2014. So that will do it for this video. For a more in-depth race review of the IndyCar Dover race as mentioned, I invite you to watch these videos produced by County Line Films and Ian the Motorsports Man, which will be linked in the description of this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.